Everyone, so in this lesson we're going to understand one of the key labour market imperfections within labour economics, and that is the role of trade unions. Now, a trade union can have a distinct effect on both a competitive and monopsony labour markets, and we'll look at the actual diagrammatic impacts in our next lesson. But in this session we're really going to focus on understanding the background of trade unions and the way in which they operate, the objectives that they will set themselves to further their members' own interests, and in addition to that, the constraints and what that means really for both micro and macro economic policy lobbying for trade unions as a whole. Okay, so starting with the definition here. An organisation of workers who join together to further their own interests. This process of joining together is really important because it strengthens their bargaining position, and that leads us on nicely to the term collective bargaining. So collective bargaining is where unionised workers will bargain collectively. So it means that they can negotiate from a stronger vantage point. It gives them a stronger voice, and it gives them more say really in the way in which the actual labour market may function. Okay, there's a number of key objectives that unions will try to work to. Remember, members will pay an actual annual subscription to become members of these trade unions, so they will expect something in return for that. First point really is about the opportunity to increase wages. Now, back in 1982, I believe the actual markup on unionised members' wages against non-unionised members was about 8.8%. And that was at a real high point. It's come down a lot since then because unions are not quite as powerful as they once were, but nevertheless that's a key point. Trade unions will try to increase the wages of their members. Secondly, to improve working conditions, to ensure that there's the correct levels of health and safety, to ensure that there's adequate staffing at all times, and staff aren't being asked to do too much, which could be causing stress and other problems for their workers, for their members rather. Okay, so this is another interesting one because if you know anything about business management principles, then you may be aware that improving the working conditions can be a real motivator in the workplace. It can improve morale and really develop better motivation as a result of that, which could actually have an increased effect on marginal productivity perhaps, and thereby raise the marginal revenue productivity. Okay, our third point, to expand job opportunities. Okay, so the trade union will want to ensure that more people are generally being employed and there's enough coverage and staff aren't being asked to do too much. There are a number of key constraints to which a trade union will actually operate though. And our first one is on the supply side, and that is really they want to ensure that every person who works in a given industry is a member of that trade union. Okay, now this does pose certain difficulties. Of course it does, in ensuring that everyone signs up to actually become a paid member of a trade union. But if there's an incentive for them to do so, i.e. that they can get increased wages, then they may well actually pursue that. But there could also be the opportunity to sort of free ride on the back of others as well as the potential for differentials between non-unionised workers. Secondly, on the demand side, awareness of market demand essentially, and that is that they're going to be completely aware that the business will not be able to actually employ beyond the marginal revenue product and offer wages in advance of that in most circumstances. So the unions will be somewhat considerate to that understanding and the principles of profit maximisation and so on, in theory. Okay, so those are two key points, but there is possibly a third, and that really relates to the degree of concentration within an industry. Some some industries rather, sorry, do face quite heavy levels of concentration. Others, the concentration ratio is far more diluted, so you will see 5, 6, 7, 8 different trade unions. Now, teaching is a great example of a industry where there's actually a large number of different trade unions, and that does weaken this collective bargaining position of trade unions. Incidentally, it's worth noting there has been a merger recently between two of the largest trade unions in the teaching industry, and that will help to improve their bargaining position, and they are now known as the National Education Union. Okay, so what does this mean for what unions will want from both the employers and from governments, and the sort of lobbying that they may undertake to actually ensure that they get the right policies being made? Firstly, they're likely, of course, to want to see an increase in product demand. If there is an increase in product demand, then that marginal revenue product curve, that demand curve for labour, will shift to the right, and that is likely to increase employment within the market, of course. So it's also going to mean that workers' wages can be increased. So the question then becomes, what can trade unions actually do to support increasing product demand for that given product? Secondly, the ability to actually influence or possibly even increase the marginal productivity of their members. If their members are more productive than non-unionised workers or workers from another trade union, there may be the potential for large differentials and a big incentive to actually join that trade union. So both of these are really quite positive. Okay, third one is about supporting minimum wage laws. So they will try to campaign for adequate minimum wages, or possibly even living wages within certain industries. Okay, and then finally, within some areas you may find that unions do advocate an increase in protectionist policies. Why? Well, because it means that imports are then face certain restrictions, and the price of imports may well rise as a direct result of that, and as a consequence the domestic supply can be increased somewhat. Okay, and that would support employment within the marketplace. Okay, so that's the key background. This is really useful stuff in developing your analysis for any essay on trade unions. Okay, it's lovely stuff this. Alright, hope you like it. Thanks.